In an apparently ordinary building, the young night doorman Lucas encounters a mystery that defies logic and threatens his sanity. The 12-story building hides a dark secret, a 13th floor that shouldn't exist. When enigmatic whispers begin to echo through the elevator during the night, Lucas finds himself entangled in a web of horror that forces him to question reality and face his deepest fears. Night fell over the city like a black mantle, swallowing the last remnants of daylight. In the lobby of the Solaris building, shadows danced restlessly under the flickering fluorescent lights. Lucas adjusted the badge on his doorman's uniform and sighed, facing the long hours ahead. In his early 20s, with perpetually messy dark hair, Lucas wasn't the type to scare easily. After all, the solitary nights in the 12-story building had become his routine over the past few months. But tonight, something in the air felt different, as if an invisible presence hovered over the place. The clock read 11:45 p.m. when the first creak echoed through the lobby. Lucas looked up, frowning. The sound came from the main elevator, a metallic and high-pitched noise he had never heard before. Hesitant, he got up and walked toward the brushed steel doors. Then he noticed the button panel was flickering erratically, the floor lights turning on and off in a frantic, silent dance. Lucas reached out, his fingers trembling slightly as he touched the cold panel, and there, between the 12th floor and the ground floor, a new button ominously gleamed, the 13th floor. Lucas's heart raced. He knew every inch of that building, every corner, every shadow. There was no 13th floor. There never had been. While his mind struggled to comprehend the inexplicable, a cold whisper slid through the elevator shaft, sending chills down his spine. "Lucas, come see us. On the 13th. The young doorman recoiled, blood freezing in his veins. The elevator doors closed with a muffled thud, leaving him alone with the echo of that supernatural call. That night, in the Solaris building, the line between reality and nightmare began to blur, and Lucas, unknowingly, took his first steps toward a mystery that threatened not only his sanity, but his very existence. The lobby clock read 2:37 a.m. when Lucas finally managed to pull himself together after the disturbing encounter with the elevator. His hands still trembled slightly as he tried to focus on the computer screen, pretending to work on some administrative task. A sudden noise made him jump out of his chair. It was the intercom, heart pounding. Lucas answered. Porter, he stammered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Lucas? It's Mrs. Cecilia from 803. The elderly and trembling voice sounded on the other end of the line. "There's something wrong with the elevator. It's making strange noises, like someone is whispering." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. "Whispering, Mrs. Cecilia?" "Yes, my boy. It sounds like people talking in there, but when the doors open, there's no one. And look, I'm wide awake, okay? I took my sleeping pill and nothing." He promised to check and hung up, feeling cold sweat trickling down his temples. It wasn't just his imagination. Something was really happening. Gathering his courage, Lucas decided to patrol the building. As he climbed the stairs, no way he was using the elevator now, he noticed other things out of the ordinary. The corridor lights flickered intermittently on the 4th floor, creating shadows that seemed to move on their own. On the 7th floor, a strong smell of mold and decay emanated from one of the doors, even though the apartment had been vacant for months. When he reached the 12th floor, the building's top floor, Lucas stopped, panting. Then he heard it, a metallic creak coming from the ceiling, as if something or someone was crawling on the floor above, a floor that shouldn't exist. "Impossible," he murmured to himself, feeling panic rising in his chest. Suddenly, all the corridor lights went out, plunging Lucas into total darkness. For a moment, the silence was absolute. Then a whisper so close it seemed to be inside his head. "Lucas, we are waiting. Come meet us." He spun on his heels, ready to run downstairs when the lights abruptly came back on. The corridor was empty, silent as if nothing had happened. But looking at the elevator at the end of the corridor, Lucas saw something that made his blood run cold. The digital display no longer showed the floor numbers. It only showed a message blinking incessantly. 13th floor, welcome to your new home. Lucas knew at that moment that his night was far from over, and that the horrors awaiting on the mysterious 13th floor were just beginning to reveal themselves. With his heart still racing, Lucas descended the stairs back to the lobby, his footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence of the building. Upon arrival, his eyes immediately fixed on the elevator. The steel doors, once so familiar, now seemed to harbor dark secrets. Swallowing hard, he approached. His hands trembled as he pressed the call button. Seconds dragged on as he waited, each moment charged with palpable tension. The soft sound of the elevator arriving made Lucas take a step back. The doors opened with a hiss, revealing the empty cabin. For a moment everything seemed normal. Then his eyes caught the change. There it was, between the 12 and the ground floor, an additional button. The number 13 gleamed with a pulsing red light, as if it were alive. "This is madness," Lucas murmured, rubbing his eyes. But the button remained, mocking his sanity. Gripped by a mix of fear and morbid curiosity, he reached out a trembling hand toward the new button. His fingers hesitated inches away, feeling a strange warmth emanating from the metal. Before he could touch it, a cold wind blew from inside the cabin, carrying a whisper. "Come, Lucas. Discover our secrets." He recoiled in horror as the doors closed by themselves. The external panel showed the elevator rising. 1, 2, 3. It continued past the 12, stopping on the non-existent 13th floor. Determined to find a rational explanation, Lucas ran to the maintenance room. Rummaging through drawers, he found the original blueprints of the building. His eyes scanned the technical drawings, desperately searching for something that could explain the phenomenon. Then he noticed, on the margin of one of the pages, almost erased by time, a handwritten note. "Project 13, cancelled after the incident. May God have mercy on our souls." A sudden noise made him jump. The radio on his belt crackled, and a distorted voice emerged from the static. "Lucas, come. The 13th floor. We need you." Looking at the clock, he saw it was exactly 3:13 a.m. The enigma of the 13th floor was deepening, and Lucas realized he was being drawn to its center, whether he wanted to or not. With trembling hands, he stored the blueprints and left the maintenance room. The corridor seemed longer and darker than ever, shadows dancing on the walls as if alive. In the background, the elevator silently awaited his call, stronger than any shout. Lucas knew he had a choice to make: ignore all this and flee, or confront the mystery of the 13th floor. But something inside him told him that regardless of his choice, the secrets of that cursed place would haunt him forever. The clock read 3:33 when Lucas finally mustered the courage to approach the elevator again. The lobby, once so familiar, now felt like a strange and hostile place. The shadows seemed to stretch toward him like spectral fingers eager to grab him. When he pressed the call button, Lucas felt a strange tingling in his fingers, like a weak electric current running through his body. The elevator arrived almost instantly, the doors opening with a metallic groan that sounded more like a lament. Hesitant, he entered the cabin. The wall mirror reflected his pale face and wide eyes full of fear. Then it began, a whisper so low it could initially be mistaken, for the electrical system's hum started echoing through the metallic walls. Lucas turned around, looking for the source, but he was alone in the cabin. "Lucas." The whisper intensified, transforming into several overlapping voices. "You left us here, for so long." He pressed himself against the wall, heart hammering in his chest. Who is there? The voices responded in unison, a ghostly chorus of laments and accusations. We are the forgotten, those abandoned on the 13th floor. You betrayed us, Lucas, left us to die. Now it's your turn to join us, forever. The air in the cabin grew cold, his breath forming small clouds of vapor. In the mirror, Lucas saw, with horror, his image starting to distort, revealing behind him pale, deformed faces with empty eyes staring at him with an ancient hunger. Desperate, he threw himself at the control panel, frantically pressing the ground floor button. But the elevator didn't move. Instead, it began to ascend slowly. 1, 2, 3. The voices grew louder, turning into agonizing screams, coming from all sides. 7, 8, 9. Lucas covered his ears, but the whispers were now inside his head, revealing horrible secrets and promises of eternal torment. 11, 12. The elevator stopped. For a moment there was absolute silence. Lucas opened his eyes, dreading what he would see. The display showed the number 13. The doors opened slowly, revealing a dark and misty corridor that seemed to stretch infinitely. A smell of mold and decay invaded the cabin, making Lucas gag. From the corridor, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was himself, Lucas, but different, older, with a torn and blood-stained uniform, eyes dull and lifeless. The other Lucas smiled, revealing rotten, sharp teeth. Welcome to your destiny, Lucas. We've been waiting for you for decades. Lucas screamed, but no sound came from his throat. The elevator doors closed behind him, sealing his fate on the enigmatic and terrible 13th floor. Lucas's scream echoed through the elevator shaft, reverberating off the metallic walls until it dissipated into the void. In a moment of clarity and desperation, he threw himself against the elevator doors, forcing them open. With a groan of twisted metal, the doors gave way, and Lucas staggered out, falling to his knees on the lobby's cold floor. Panting and trembling, he raised his eyes. The clock on the wall read 3:34 a.m. Only 1 minute had passed since he had entered the elevator. But for Lucas, it felt like hours of torment. Determined to unravel the mystery that haunted him, Lucas got up with difficulty. His uniform was drenched in cold sweat, and his hands still trembled, but a fierce resolve shone in his eyes. He needed answers, stumbling into the building's small archive room. Lucas began frantically searching through the dusty folders. Tenant records, architectural plans, maintenance reports, anything could hold a clue about the enigmatic 13th floor. Hours passed as he delved into the dark history of the Solaris building. In an old, yellowed newspaper from decades ago, a headline caught his attention. Tragedy at Solaris. Elevator accident kills 13. With trembling hands, Lucas read the article. In 1977, during the building's construction, an elevator fell from the 13th floor under construction, killing all the workers inside. The accident was attributed to structural failures, and the 13th floor was sealed, officially removed from the plans. But there was more. In an old janitor's diary found at the bottom of a drawer, Lucas discovered notes. The voices don't stop. They come from the elevator shaft every night, begging, accusing. They say they were betrayed, that someone let them die on purpose, and now they want revenge. A shiver ran down Lucas's spine. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, forming a terrifying image. Suddenly, the room's lights flickered. The air grew dense, charged with static electricity. In the oppressive silence, Lucas heard a familiar whisper. You are close to the truth, Lucas, but you still don't know everything. Come to the 13th floor. Only there will you find the answers you seek. The young doorman swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the decision he had to make. Continuing the investigation meant risking even more, diving headfirst into the nightmare the Solaris building held. But ignoring, pretending nothing happened, was no longer an option. With trembling hands, Lucas gathered the documents he found. He looked at the clock. 5:13 a.m. Dawn was about to break, but he knew the real darkness was yet to come. Taking a deep breath, he stood up. It was time to confront the horrors of the 13th floor, no matter the cost. With hesitant steps, Lucas headed back to the elevator, the whispers guiding him to an uncertain and terrifying destiny. The metallic sound of the elevator doors closing echoed through the empty lobby, sealing Lucas's fate. His trembling fingers hovered over the button panel for a moment before finally pressing the number 13. The button pulsed with a sickly red light, as if it were alive. The elevator began to ascend, each floor passing in a blur. Lucas felt his stomach churn, not just from the upward movement, but from the growing terror in his chest. The cabin lights began to flicker erratically, casting dancing shadows on the walls. When the display marked the 12th floor, the elevator stopped abruptly. For an instant, there was absolute silence. Then an ear-splitting creak filled the cabin, as if the metal itself was screaming. Lucas covered his ears, eyes wide with fear. The elevator jerked and continued its ascent, now slower. The air grew dense, filled with a putrid smell of decay. The walls seemed to pulse, contracting and expanding, as if breathing. Finally, the number 13 appeared on the display. The doors opened with an agonized groan, revealing a corridor that defied all logic and sanity. The 13th floor was a nightmarish architectural maze. The corridor stretched infinitely, its walls covered in yellowed wallpaper that seemed to move, forming distorted faces silently moaning. The floor wobbled under Lucas's feet, as if it were liquid, heart pounding. He took a step out of the elevator. The fluorescent lights above buzzed and flickered, casting shadows that seemed to have a life of their own. Doors lined both sides of the corridor, each numbered with the fateful 13. "Welcome, Lucas," whispered voices from all directions. "Finally, you came to find us." Suddenly, all the doors opened simultaneously. From each one, spectral figures emerged, the 13 workers who died in the accident. Their bodies were translucent, floating inches above the ground, their faces frozen in expressions of agony. The air grew icy, and Lucas felt as if 1,000 needles were piercing his skin. He tried to run back to the elevator, but the doors had disappeared, leaving only a smooth wall. "There is no escape, Lucas," said a voice behind him. Turning, he found himself face to face with his older, decrepit doppelganger. "You are the final piece of the puzzle, the 14th sacrifice to complete the cycle." The spectral figures advanced, arms outstretched toward him. Lucas backed up until he was cornered against the wall, terror paralyzing every fiber of his being. Then a sudden memory hit him, the words scribbled on the building's plans: "May God have mercy on our souls." In an act of desperation and courage, Lucas closed his eyes and began to recite the only prayer he remembered from his childhood. The voices around him turned into screams of fury. The ground beneath his feet began to shake violently. When he opened his eyes, he saw the spectral figures writhing as if being pulled by an invisible force. In the midst of the chaos, Lucas glimpsed a faint light at the end of the corridor. Without thinking twice, he ran toward it, the screams of the spectres echoing behind him. The light grew, engulfing everything around, and then silence. Lucas opened his eyes, blinking against the fluorescent light of the lobby. He was lying on the floor near the elevator, his body aching and his mind in turmoil. The clock on the wall read 6:13 a.m. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky blood red through the building's windows. As he got up with difficulty, fragments of the experience on the 13th floor flashed in his mind. Had it been real, a dream, or something in between? The voices of the spectres still echoed in his ears, a constant reminder of the horror he had faced. With unsteady steps, Lucas headed to the archive room. Something compelled him to continue his investigation, to unravel the mystery completely. Rummaging through the papers he had left scattered, his eyes caught something he hadn't noticed before. A thin folder hidden behind a dusty shelf. With trembling hands, he opened the file. It was a confidential report dated 1977, signed by the then owner of the Solaris building, Ernesto Valdez. As he read, Lucas's blood ran cold. The report revealed a truth more sinister than he could have imagined. The construction of the Solaris was not just a real estate venture. It was part of an obscure ritual. Ernesto Valdez, obsessed with the occult, believed that by sacrificing 13 souls in a newly constructed building, he could open a portal to another dimension, granting power and immortality. The accident in the elevator was meticulously planned. The 13 workers, handpicked, were sacrificed when the elevator fell from the 13th floor. But the ritual was incomplete. Valdez discovered he needed a 14th sacrifice, a guardian who would voluntarily surrender to the 13th floor. For decades the building waited. Doormen came and went, some experiencing inexplicable events, others remaining unaware of the curse, until Lucas arrived. One detail in the report made Lucas's heart stop. An old photo of Ernesto Valdez. The face staring back at him was identical to his own distorted reflection in the elevator mirror, to the doppelganger who confronted him on the 13th floor. The revelation struck him like lightning. Lucas was not just chosen to be the 14th sacrifice. He was the reincarnation of Ernesto Valdez, destined to return and complete the ritual he had started decades ago. The whispers echoed in his mind again. Remember, Lucas. Remember who you really are. Images of a past life flooded his consciousness. The young doorman staggered, leaning against the wall for support. The duality of his existence, Lucas, the innocent doorman, and Ernesto, the obsessed occultist, waged war within him. The building seemed to come alive around him, the walls pulsing as if they were a giant heart. Lucas Ernesto knew he was facing a crucial choice: complete the ritual, freeing the trapped souls and possibly achieving the power he had sought in his past life, or find a way to break the cycle, freeing not just the spirits but himself from this centuries-old curse. The sun finally broke the horizon, bathing the lobby in golden light. Lucas raised his eyes to the elevator, which seemed to call to him. The button for the 13th floor blinked, a silent promise of resolution, whatever it might be. With the weight of 2 lives on his shoulders, Lucas took a step toward his destiny, knowing that his next decision would seal not only his future, but also that of the souls trapped in the limbo of the Solaris building. The light of the rising sun cast long shadows across the lobby, as Lucas, now aware of his duality as Ernesto Valdez, walked toward the elevator. Each step echoed in the sepulchral silence of the Solaris building, as if the very structure held its breath, awaiting the conclusion of its long and dark mystery. The elevator doors opened with a metallic whisper, inviting him in. Lucas hesitated for a moment, his 2 natures in conflict. The memory of the horrors he had witnessed on the 13th floor fought against the burning desire for power that Ernesto still harbored deep within. Taking a deep breath, he entered the cabin. The button for the 13th floor pulsed with a hypnotic red light. Lucas extended his hand, fingers trembling slightly. The instant he touched the button, an electric shock coursed through his body. The elevator began to ascend faster than it had ever gone before. The lights flickered frantically, and the air grew denser. Lucas felt as if he were being compressed, his vision darkening at the edges. When the doors opened, the 13th floor that greeted him was different. No longer an endless corridor, but a vast circular room. In the center, a chalk circle was drawn on the floor, inscribed with arcane symbols around its edge. Surrounding it, 13 spectral figures, the sacrificed workers, floated silently. A voice, both familiar and alien, echoed in Lucas's mind. The circle is almost complete. Only one step separates you from absolute power. Make the choice, Ernesto. Finish what you started. Lucas staggered to the center of the room, his two natures warring. The doorman wanted to flee, to break the curse, but Ernesto longed for the power promised so many decades ago. With a scream that was both agony and ecstasy, Ernesto stepped into the circle. The ground beneath his feet trembled, and a bluish light emanated from the inscriptions. The 13 spectral figures began to spin around him, faster and faster until they became a blur of pure energy. The air crackled with static electricity. Lucas felt his body lifting off the ground, suspended in the center of the vortex of souls. Unimaginable power flowed through him, filling every fiber of his being. For a moment he glimpsed the portal opening, revealing realities beyond human comprehension. But then, at the height of the ritual, something unexpected happened. A memory from his life as Lucas, the smile of his mother, the embrace of his father, flashed through his mind like lightning. In that moment of clarity, Lucas realized the true cost of the power he sought. "No!" he shouted, his voice reverberating with supernatural force. "This ends now." With a supreme effort of will, Lucas broke the circle, shattering the ritual. A wave of energy exploded around him, hurling him against the wall. The 13 souls, finally freed, ascended in spirals of light, disappearing into the ceiling. The 13th floor began to disintegrate around him. Walls crumbled. The floor opened into deep fissures. Lucas crawled toward the elevator, each movement an agony. He managed to enter the cabin seconds before the entire floor collapsed on itself. The elevator plummeted, cables snapping in the structural collapse. Lucas closed his eyes, accepting his fate, but miraculously, the emergency system kicked in, slowing the fall in the final moments. With a deafening crash, the elevator hit the bottom of the shaft. The doors opened to the lobby, and Lucas staggered out, injured but alive. The morning sun flooded the lobby. Sirens sounded in the distance. The collapse of the 13th floor had not gone unnoticed. As he leaned against the wall, exhausted, Lucas saw his reflection in the lobby mirror. It was just him now, the young doorman. Ernesto Valdez and his obsession had disappeared along with the 13th floor. In the days that followed, the Solaris building was evacuated and condemned. The official story spoke of hidden structural failures finally coming to light. But for Lucas, the truth was much more complex and dark. He left the city shortly after, carrying the weight of the knowledge of what really happened that fateful night. The mystery of the 13th floor had been solved, but at a terrible cost. Lucas knew he would spend the rest of his life trying to atone for the sins of his past incarnation, always vigilant against the shadows lurking in the dark corners of reality. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, he could still hear the distant echo of whispers coming from an elevator that no longer existed, a constant reminder of the horrors that inhabit the spaces between the floors of our reality. 5 years had passed since that fateful night at the Solaris building. Once an imposing structure, it was now just an empty shell, its broken windows staring at the city like dead eyes. Faded "Do Not Cross" yellow tape hung loosely in the wind, a weathered reminder of the tragedy that had occurred there. Lucas, now 30, watched the building from across the street. His face, thinner and marked by time, carried the weight of the secrets he kept. He adjusted the collar of his shirt, feeling the familiar discomfort of the scar snaking down his neck, a physical reminder of his battle on the 13th floor. Since that night, Lucas had wandered aimlessly, unable to settle in one place or job for long. The nightmares pursued him, filled with whispers and shadows that danced on the walls. But something had drawn him back to this city, to this place. A call he could not ignore. Rumors had begun to circulate. Demolition plans for the Solaris were underway. Accompanied by strange stories, workers reported inexplicable sounds coming from the elevator shaft. Lights were seen flickering on the upper floors, despite all electricity having been cut off years ago. Lucas knew it was no coincidence. The 13th floor might have disappeared physically, but its echoes persisted, trapped between realities. And now, with the building's imminent destruction, these pent-up energies threatened to break free. Crossing the street, Lucas approached the barricaded entrance of the Solaris. His heart quickened when he saw the lock was broken, the chain lying on the ground. Someone, or something, had entered recently. With trembling hands, he pushed open the door. The smell of mold and abandonment hit him like a wave. The lobby, once so familiar, was now a playground for shadows and painful memories. His eyes fixed on the elevator. The slightly ajar doors seemed to beckon him. A low hum emanated from the shaft, as if the machines had awakened from a long sleep. Lucas hesitated. Part of him wanted to run, to leave the past buried under the building's rubble, but he knew he couldn't. The cycle needed to be definitively ended. Taking a deep breath, he approached the elevator. The doors opened fully at his touch, revealing the dark cabin. On the panel, a single button glowed with a sickly red light. 13. "It's over," Lucas murmured to himself, stepping into the cabin. "It's time to finish this once and for all." The doors closed behind him with a dull thud. The elevator began to ascend, taking Lucas to his final confrontation with the echoes of the past. Whatever awaited him beyond those doors, he was determined to face it. For some stories, like some buildings, have foundations too deep to simply be forgotten or demolished. And Lucas knew that as long as the mystery of the 13th floor persisted, he would never find peace. The elevator continued its inexorable ascent toward an uncertain destiny, carrying with it Lucas's last hopes for redemption and the last vestiges of a terror that refused to die. The story of the Solaris building and the mysterious 13th floor is just one among countless others. In every city, on every street, stand buildings with dark secrets waiting to be revealed. The elevators we use daily might be portals to unimaginable dimensions, and the seemingly empty corridors might harbor presences that defy our understanding. Lucas managed to escape his terrible fate, but at what cost? And how many others like him are trapped in endless cycles of horror, unable to break the chains binding them to cursed places? Stay tuned for the next tale from Draven Nocturnus, where new horrors and mysteries await those brave enough to face them. For remember, not all floors of a building are listed in the directory, and not all doors lead where we expect. The next time you step into an elevator and feel that sudden change in the atmosphere, that inexplicable shiver down your spine, ask yourself, where exactly are you going? And more importantly, what is waiting for you when the doors open? Until the next night of terror, dear listeners. And don't forget, always double-check the floor number before stepping out of the elevator. You never know where or when you might end up.